Section 20 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. Hand. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Treatise IV, chapters 27 through 30. Chapter 27. We have sufficiently inspected and considered the section of the text which sets forth the probity which the noble soul furnishes to manhood, wherefore it seems right to turn to the third part which begins, and in old age, wherein the text purposes to show those things which the noble nature reveals and must have in the third period, to wit, old age. And it says that the noble soul in age is prudent, is just, is open-handed, and rejoices to tell of the goodness and excellence of others, and to hear of it, that is to say, is affable. And truly these four virtues are most fitting to this age. And to perceive this, be it known that, as Tully says in that of old age, our life has a fixed course and a simple path, that of our right nature, and in every part of our life place is given for certain things. Wherefore, just as that is given to adolescence, as said above, whereby we may come to perfection and maturity, so too is given to manhood that perfection and maturity themselves, so that the sweetness of its fruit may be profitable to itself and to others. For as Aristotle says, man is a civic animal, wherefore he is required not only to be useful to himself but also to others. And so we read of Cato, that he did not think of himself as born for himself, but for his country and for all the world. Wherefore, after our own proper perfection, which is acquired in manhood, that perfection should also come about which enlightens not only ourselves but others, and man should open out like a rose that can no longer keep closed, and should spread abroad the perfume which has been generated within. And this should come about in that third period of life with which we are dealing. It is fitting then to be prudent, that is wise, and to be so demands a good memory of things formerly seen, and a good knowledge of things present, and good foresight of things to come. And as the philosopher says in the 6th of the Ethics, it is impossible for a man to be wise unless he is good, and therefore a man is not to be called wise who proceeds by stratagems and deceits, but he is to be called astute. For as no one would call a man who had skill to strike the point of a knife into the pupil of the eye wise, so neither is he to be called wise who hath skill to do some evil thing, doing the which he ever injureth himself ere he injures another. If it be rightly considered, from prudence come good counsels, which lead the man himself and others to a right goal of human affairs and doings. And this is that gift which Solomon, when he saw himself set to govern the people, required of God, as is written in the 3rd book of Kings. And a prudent man such as this waiteth not till someone saith to him, Give me counsel, but himself foreseeing, without being requested, he giveth him counsel, like to the rose, which not only giveth its perfume to him who cometh to it that he may have it, but also to everyone who passeth it by. Here some physician or legist may say, Then I am to carry my counsel, and to give it even to those that ask it not, and pluck no fruit of my art? I answer as our Lord saith, I receive freely, if it hath been freely given. I say then, Sir Legist, that those counsels which have not respect to thy art, and which proceed only from that good wit which God gave thee, and this is the prudence whereof we are now discoursing, thou shouldst not sell to the children of him who gave it thee. Those which have respect to the art which thou hast purchased, these thou mayest sell, yet not so but that it is fitting from time to pay tithes and give to God, that is, to those poor who have naught left save the divine grace. It behoves this period of life also to be just, so that its judgments and its authority may be a light and a law to others. And because this singular virtue, to wit, justice, was seen by the ancient philosophers to be revealed perfectly in this period of life, they committed the guidance of the city to those who had reached this age, and therefore the college of the rulers was called the Senate. O my wretched, wretched country! What pity for thee constrains me whensoever I read, whensoever I write, of aught that hath respect to civil government. But since justice will be dealt with in the last treatise but one of this volume, let it suffice at present to have touched this little upon it. It is also meet for this period of life to be generous, because a thing is most in season when it satisfies the due of its nature, nor can the due of generosity ever be so satisfied as at this period of life. For if we would rightly consider how Aristotle proceeds in the 4th of the Ethics, and Tully in that of Offices, generosity must be in such time and place that the generous man injure not either himself or others. Which thing may not be without prudence and without justice, which to have in perfection by the natural way before this age is impossible. Ah, ye ill-starred and ill-born, who disinherit widows and wards, who snatch from the most helpless, who rob and seize the rights of others, and therefrom prepare feasts, make gifts of horses and arms, robes and money, wear gorgeous apparel, build marvellous edifices, and believe yourself to be doing generously. And what else is this than to take the cloth from the altar and cover therewith the robber and his table? No otherwise, ye tyrants, should your presence be scoffed at, than the robber who should invite his guests to his house, and should set upon the table the napkin he had stolen from the altar, with the ecclesiastical signs yet on it, and should suppose that no one would perceive it. Hearken, ye stubborn ones, to what Tully saith against you in the Book of Offices. Verily there may be many who, desiring to be conspicuous and famous, take from these to give to those, thinking to be held in esteem if they make folk wealthy by what means soever. But this is so counter to what ought to be, that naught is more. Further, it becomes this period of life to be affable, that is, to love to speak of good and to hear of it, because it is well to speak good on those occasions when it will be hearkened to. And this period of life carries a shade of authority, whereby it seems that men hearken more to it than to any earlier age. And it seems that it ought to have more beautiful and fair news because of its long experience of life. Wherefore Tully says in that of old age, in the person of the ancient Cato, upon me has grown both the desire and the enjoyment of conversation beyond what was my wont. And that all these four things are fitting to this period of life, Ovid instructs us in the 7th of the Metamorphoses, in the story where he tells how Cephalus of Athens came to King Aeacus for help in the war that Athens was waging with Crete. He shows that old Aeacus was prudent, when having lost by pestilence, through corruption of the air, almost all his people, he wisely had recourse to God and asked from him the restoration of his dead people, and by his wit, which held him to patience and made him turn to God, his people were restored to him greater than before. He shows that he was just when he says that he made partition to his new people and divided his desolated land. He shows that he was generous when he said to Cephalus, after his request for aid, O Athens, ask not help from me, but take it, and consider not the forces which this island holds, and all this state of my possessions, yours doubtfully. We lack not power, nay, we have superfluity, and the foe is mighty, and the time for giving is right prosperous, and without excuse. Ah, how many things are to note in this answer! But for one with a good understanding it is enough that it be set down here, just as Ovid sets it down. He shows that he was affable when he carefully tells and rehearses to Cephalus in a long discourse the story of the plague of his people and the restoration of them. Wherefore it is manifest enough that four things are suitable to this age, because the noble nature manifests them in it, as the text says. And that the example which has been spoken of may be the more memorable, he says of King Aeacus that he was the father of Telamon, or Peleus, and of Phocus, of which Telamon sprang Ajax, and of Peleus Achilles. Chapter 28. After the section now discoursed upon, we are to proceed to the last, that is to the one which begins then in the 4th term of life, whereby the text purposes to manifest that which the noble soul doth in her last age, to wit, decrepitude. And it says that she does two things. The one, that she returns to God as to that port whence she departed when she came to enter upon the sea of this life. The other is that she blesseth the voyage that she hath made, because it hath been straight and good and without the bitterness of tempest. And here be it known that, as Tully says in that of old age, natural death is as it were our port and rest from our long voyage. And even as the good sailor, when he draws near to the port, lowers his sails and gently with mild impulse enters into it, so ought we to lower the sails of our worldly activities and turn to God with all our purpose and heart, so that we may come to that port with all sweetness and with all peace. And herein we have a noteworthy instruction in gentleness from our own nature, for at such an age death is not pain nor any bitterness, but as a ripe apple, lightly and without violence, drops from its branch, so our soul without pain parts from the body wherein it has been. Whence Aristotle, in that of Youth and Age, says that the death that takes place in old age hath no sadness. And as to him who cometh from a long journey, ere he enter the gate of his city, the citizens thereof come forth to meet him, so come and so should come, to meet the noble soul, those citizens of the eternal life. And this they bring about by their good deeds and contemplations, for when the soul has already been surrendered to God and abstracted from the affairs and thoughts of the world, it seems to see those whom it believes to be with God. Hearken what Tully says in the person of the ancient Cato. I lift up myself in the utmost yearning to see your fathers whom I loved, and not only them, but also those of whom I have heard speak. The noble soul then surrenders herself to God in this period, and awaits the end of this life with great longing, and seems to herself to be leaving an hostel and returning to her own house, seems to be coming back from a journey and returning to her own city, seems to be coming from the sea and returning to the port. O wretched and vile, who with hoisted sails rush into this port, and where ye ought to rest, shatter yourselves in the full strength of the wind, and lose yourselves in the very place to which you have made so long a voyage. Verily the knight Lancelot would not enter there with hoisted sails, nor our most noble Latin Guido of Montefeltro. In truth, these noble ones lowered the sails of the activities of the world, for in their advanced age they gave themselves to religious orders, putting aside every mundane delight and activity. And no one can excuse himself by the tie of marriage which holds him in advanced age, for not only they turn to a religious order who liken themselves in garment and in life to Saint Benedict and to Saint Augustine and to Saint Francis and to Saint Dominic, but also to a good and true religious order may they also turn who abide in matrimony, for God would have naught of us in religion save the heart. And therefore St. Paul says to the Romans, not he is a Jew who is so outwardly, nor is that circumcision which is manifested in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is so in secret, and circumcision of the heart, in spirit, not in letter, is circumcision, the praise whereof is not from men but from God. And further, the noble soul at this age blesses the times past, and well may she bless them, because turning back her memory through them she is mindful of her righteous doings, without which she could not come to the port whereto she is drawing nigh, with so great wealth nor with so great pain. And she doth as the good merchant when, as he draweth nigh to the port, he examineth how he hath prospered, and saith, had I not passed by such a way, this treasure I should not have, nor should I have wherewith to rejoice in my city, to which I am drawing nigh. And therefore he blesseth the way that he hath made. And that these two things are suitable for this period of life, the great poet Lucan figures forth to us in the second of his Pharsalia, when he says that Marcia returned to Cato, and begged him again and prayed that he would take her back again, by which Marcia is understood the noble soul. And we may thus convert the figure to the truth. Marcia was a virgin, and in that state she signifies adolescence. Then she came to Cato, and in that state she signifies manhood. Then she produced a son, by which are signified those virtues which are declared above to be fitting in the prime of life. And she departed from Cato, and married Hortensius, whereby it is signified that the prime of life departs and old age comes. She bore sons also to him, whereby are signified the virtues which are declared above to be fitting in old age. Hortensius died, whereby is signified the end of old age, and Marcia, having become a widow, by which widowhood is signified decrepitude, returned at the beginning of her widowhood to Cato, whereby is signified that the noble soul at the beginning of decrepitude returns to God. And what earthly man was more worthy to signify God than Cato? Verily, none. And what says Marcia to Cato? Whilst blood was in me, that is prime manhood, whilst the maternal power was in me, that is to say age, for she is in truth the mother of those other virtues, as has been said above. I, said Marcia, did and accomplished all thy commands. That is to say that the soul abode with constancy in the civic activities. She says, I took 2 husbands, that is, I have been fruitful in 2 ages. Now, says Marcia, that my womb is wearied, and I am exhausted for bearing offspring, to thee I return, no longer being such as may be given to another spouse. That is to say that the noble soul, knowing that she has no longer any womb for fruit, that is to say when her members feel that they have come to feeble state, returns to God who hath no need of the corporeal members. And Marcia says, grant me the treatise of the ancient couch, give me the name only of marriage, which is to say that noble soul saith to God, now give me repose, O my Lord. She saith, grant me at least that in this so much life as remaineth I may be called thine. And Marcia saith, 2 reasons move me to say this. The one is that it may be said after me that I died as Cato's wife. The other is that it may be said after me that thou didst not expel me, but didst give me in marriage of good heart. By these 2 reasons the noble soul is moved, and desireth to depart from this life as the spouse of God, and desireth to show that God was gracious to his creature. O wretched and ill-born who prefer to depart from this life under the title of Hortensius rather than of Cato, with whose name it is well to end that which it behoves us to discourse concerning the tokens of nobility, because in him nobility itself shows all its tokens in every age. Chapter 29. Now that the text has been expounded, as also those tokens which appear in the noble man in every age whereby he may be recognized, and without which he may not be, any more than the sun can be without light, or fire without heat, the text at the end of all that has been related about nobleness cries out against the people that saith, O ye who have hearkened to me, see now how many be thus deceived. to wit, those who believe themselves to be noble because they are of famous and ancient generations and descended from excellent fathers, though they have no nobleness in themselves. And here rise two questions whereto at the end of this treatise it is well to give heed. Sir Manfred de Vico, who has now the titles of praetor and prefect, might say, "Whatsoever I may be, I call to men's minds and represent my ancestors, who by their nobleness earned the office of the prefecture, earned to set their heads to the crowning of the empire, earned the reception of the rose from the Roman pastor. Therefore I ought to receive honor and reverence from the people." And this is the one question. The other is that he of San Nazaro of Pavia and he of the Piscacelli of Naples might say, "If nobleness were that which hath been said, to wit a divine seed graciously placed in the human soul, and if no progeny or race hath a soul, as is manifest, no progeny or race could be called noble. And this is counter to the opinion of those who say that our families are the most noble in their cities." To the first question Juvenal answers in the 8th Satire, when he begins as it were to exclaim, "What avail these honours which remain from them of old, if he who would fain mantle him therein liveth ill? If he who discourses of his ancestors and sets forth their great and marvellous deeds is intent on wretched and vile doings? And yet," says the same satirist, "who will call him noble because of his good family, who is himself unworthy of his good family?" This is no other than to call a dwarf a giant. Then afterwards he says to such an one, "Between thee and a statue made in memory of thy ancestor there is naught to choose, save that its head is marble and thine is alive." But herein, speaking with submission, I agree not with the poet, for the statue of marble or of wood or of metal, left as a memorial of some worthy man, differeth much in its effect from its unworthy descendant. Because the statue never confirms the good opinion in those who have heard the fair fame of him whose statue is, and begets it in others, whereas the worthless son or grandson does just the reverse, for he weakens the opinion of those who have heard good of his ancestry, for a thought will come to them and say, "It may not be all that which is said of this man's ancestors is true, since we see such a plant of their sowing. Wherefore he should receive not honor but dishonor who beareth ill witness of the good. And therefore Tully saith, that the son of the worthy man should strive to bear good witness of his father. Wherefore in my judgment, even as he who defames a worthy man deserves to be shunned by folk and not hearkened to, so the vile man, descended from worthy ancestors, deserves to be expelled by all. And the good man should shut his eyes so as not to look upon his reproach which reproaches the goodness that remains only in memory. And let this suffice for the present for the first question which was mooted. To the second question may be answered that a family in itself hath not a soul, and yet it is true that it is called noble, and in a certain sense so it is. Wherefore be it known that every whole is composed of its parts, and there are some wholes which have one simple essence together with their parts, as in one man there is one essence of the whole and of each of its parts. And what is said to exist in the part is said in the same sense to exist in the whole. There are other wholes which have not a common essence with their parts, like a heap of grain. The essence of such is secondary, resulting from many grains, which have true and primary essence in themselves. And the qualities of the parts are said to exist in such a whole, in the same secondary sense in which it has an essence. Wherefore a heap is called white, because the grains whereof the heap is composed are white. In truth, this whiteness is rather in the grains primarily, and comes out as the result in the whole heap secondarily, and thus in a secondary sense it may be called white. And it is in this sense that a family or a race can be called noble. Wherefore be it known that as the white grains must preponderate to make a white heap, so to make a noble race the noble persons must preponderate in it. I say preponderate, that is, exceed in number, so that their goodness by its fame may overshadow and conceal the contrary which is in it. And just as from a white heap of grain you might remove the wheat grain by grain, and grain by grain substitute red millet, till the whole heap at last would change its colour, so out of a noble race the good might die one by one, and worthless be born into it until it should change its name, and should not deserve to be called noble but base. And let this suffice as answer to the second question. Chapter 30. As is set forth above in the third chapter of this treatise, this ode has three chief parts, wherefore, since two of them have been discoursed upon, whereof the first begins in the aforesaid chapter and the second in the 16th, so that the first is completed in 13, the second in 14 chapters, not counting the proem of the treatise on the ode, which is comprised in 2 chapters, we are now in this 30th and last chapter to discuss briefly the third chief division, which was composed as the tornata of this ode, for a kind of adornment, and which begins, "Against the erring ones take thou thy way, my ode." And here To begin with, be it known that every good workman on the completion of his work should ennoble and beautify it as much as he may, that it may leave his hands the more noted and the more precious. And this it is my purpose to do here in this section, not that I am a good workman, but that I aspire after being such. I say then, against the erring ones and the rest. This against the erring ones, etc., is a whole section, and it is the name of this ode, chosen after the example of the good brother Thomas of Aquino, who gave the name Against the Gentiles to a book of his which he made to the confusion of all those who depart from our faith. I say then, take thou thy way, as though I should say, thou art now complete, for it is time no longer to stand still but to go, for thy emprise is great. And when thou shalt be in the region where Our Lady is, tell her thy business. Where it be noted, that, as saith our Lord, pearls must not be cast before swine, because it does them no good and is lost to the pearls, and, as saith the poet Aesop in the first fable, a grain of corn is more profit to a cock than a pearl, and therefore he leaves the one and picks up the other. And considering this, I caution and command the ode to reveal its business where this lady, to wit, philosophy, shall be found. And there shall this most noble lady be found where her treasure house is to be found, to wit the soul wherein she harbours. And this philosophy not only harbours in the sages, but also, as was shown above in another treatise, wherever the love of her harbours. And to such I tell my ode to reveal its business, because to them its teaching will be profitable, and by them it will be received. And I say to it, declare to this lady, I go discoursing of a friend of thine. Truly nobility is a friend of hers, for so much doth the one love the other that nobleness ever demands her, and philosophy turns not her most sweet regards in any other direction. Oh, how great and beauteous adornment is this which at the end of this ode is given to her, calling her the friend of her whose true abode is in the most secret place of the divine mind. End of section 20.
Section 21 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy Pug. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri, translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode IV. Text of the projected 5th treatise. Amor che muovi tua virtù dal cielo. Love, who dost launch thy power from the heaven, doth the sun his splendour, for there his worth is apprehended most, where his ray most nobility encounters. And as he puts to flight darkness and chill, so, lofty sire, dost thou drive baseness from the heart of men, nor can wrath make long stand against thee. From thee must every blessing needs arise, for which the whole world travaileth. Without thee perishes all potency in us of doing well, e'en as a painting in a darksome place, which may not manifest itself, nor give delight of colour nor of art. Upon my heart thy light doth ever strike, as on a star the ray, since when my soul became the handmaiden of thy power at the first. Whence hath its life a longing that leadeth me with its persuasive speech to gaze again upon each beauteous thing with more delight in measure as 'tis winsome. By power of this, my gaze, into my mind a damsel has entered who has captured me, and in flame has kindled me as water by its clearness kindles flame, because, when she approached, those rays of thine, wherewith thou dost make me glow, all rose up in her eyes. Even as in her being she is beauteous and noble, in her features and amorous, so does imagination, resting not, adorn her in the mind wherein I bear her. Not that it is subtle in itself, as for a thing so lofty, but from thy might it hath it that it dares, beyond the power nature hath proffered us. Her beauty is thy worth's accreditor, in that effect may be estimated upon a worthy subject, in fashion as the sun is fire's ensign, though giving not, nor reaving from it power, but making it, in lofty region, reveal more saving force in its effect. Then, sire, of such a gentle nature that this nobility, which cometh down to us, and all other excellence, taketh its source from thy loftiness. Have regard unto my life, how hard it is, and take pity on it, for thy burning, by her beauty, maketh me have at heart excess of anguish. Love, of thy sweetness make her feel the great yearning that I have to behold her, nor suffer not that she, by glory of her strength, lead me to death. For not yet is she aware how she doth please, nor how mightily I love her, nor how she bears my peace within her eyes. Great honour shall it be to thee if thou aid me, and rich gift to me, in measure as I know full well, who find me at such point where I may not defend my life. For my spirits are assailed by such a one that I deem not, save I have succour through thy will, that they can keep their stand and perish not. And thy potency, moreover, shall be felt by this fair lady, who is worthy of it, for it seems as it were fitting to give to her great store of every good, as unto one born into the world to hold lordship over the mind of all who look upon her. End of section 21. Section 22 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode V. Text of the projected Sixth Treatise. Io sento sì d'amor la gran possanza. So do I feel the mighty power of love, that I may not endure long to support it, which is grievous to me. For so does his might keep growing, and mine I feel to fail so, that hour by hour I am enfeebled from my wont. I say not that love works more than I desire, for if he wrought all that my will demands, such power as nature gave me would support it not, in that it is finite. And this it is whence I pluck sorrow, that power will not keep faith with purpose, but if from good will springs reward, I demand it, for furtherance of life, of those eyes whose beauteous splendour brings comfort whensoe'er I taste of pain. The rays of these beauteous eyes enter into mine enamoured ones, and bring the sweet, whenas I taste the bitter. And they know the way, even as such who erst have traversed it, and they know the spot where they have left love, when through my eyes they led him in. Wherefore, when they turn on me, they do mercy, and to her whose I am they purchase loss, when they hide themselves from me, who so love her, that only to serve her do I hold myself dear, and my musings, compact merely of love, as to their goal hie them to her service. Wherefore to perform the same I long so greatly, that did I believe I might accomplish it by fleeing her, it were an easy thing to do. But I know that I should die thereby. 'Tis very love indeed that hath captured me, and mightily indeed he grips me, since I would do that which I say for him. For no love is of such weight as is that which of death makes a man taste for good service of another. And in such will was I confirmed, so soon as the great longing which I feel was born, by virtue of the pleasure which gathers from all good in the fair countenance. A servant am I, and when I bethink me whose, and what she is, I am utterly content. For if a man may serve well against good pleasure, and if unripeness bereaves me of grace, I look to the time which shall grasp more reason, if but my life shall hold her own so long. When I muse upon a noble longing, born of that great longing which I bear, that draws all my powers to well-doing, Meseems that I am overpaid with grace, and in like manner more than wrongly meseems I bear the name of servant. So before her eyes of pleasure is serving made, thanks to a not my goodness. Yet since I hold me close knit to truth, needs must such longing count as service, because if I make haste to be of worth, I ponder not so much on what concerns myself as her who hath me in her power. For I so do in order that her cause may be more prized. And I am wholly hers, so do I esteem myself, because love hath made me worthy of so great honour. Other than love could not have made me such as to be, worthily, aught that pertains to her, the unenamoured, who takes her stand as a lady whom concerns not the amorous mind, that without her may not pass an hour. Not yet so many times have I beheld her, but that new beauty I may find in her, whence love makes grow his greatness in me in measure as new joy is added. Wherefore it comes about that so long do I abide in one state, and so long doth love lime with one torment and one sweetness, as lasts that season that so often goads me, which endures from when I lose the sight of her until the time when it be won again. Tornata. My beauteous ode, if thou be like to me, thou wilt not be scornful so much as cometh to thy excellence. Wherefore, I pray thee that thou ply thy wit, my sweet amorous one, in culling mode and way that shall become thee. Should cavalier invite thee or arrest, ere thou yield thyself to his pleasure, see if thou canst make him of thy sect. And if it may not be, straightway abandon him, for the good keeps chamber ever with the good. But if it chances that one often throws himself into a company where he has naught save smirch of evil fame that men proclaim of him, with the guilty sojourn not by wit nor art, for never was it wisdom yet to hold their side. Alternative Tornata. Ode. To the three least vicious of our city thou shalt take thy way ere thou go other whither. Salute the two, and see to it that thou try the third to draw him first out of ill company. Tell him the good joins not in conflict with the good, rather than win emprise against the wicked. Tell him that he is mad who fleeth not, for fear of shame, from madness, for he feareth who hath terror of the evil, therefore fleeing the one healeth the other. End of section 22. Section 23 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode VI. Text of the projected 7th treatise. Così nel mio parlar voglio esser aspro. As harsh in my discourse would I fain be as in her bearing is that beauteous stone, whom, every hour, petrify more hardness and more cruel nature. And she clothes her person in an adamant, such as for it, or for that she arrests her, there issues not from quiver arrow that can ever catch her naked. But she slays, and it avails not for a man to case him, nor to flee from the mortal blows. For, as they had wings, they light on folk and shatter every armour. Wherefore, to protect me from her, I have nor wit nor power. I find no shield she may not shatter for me, nor place to hide me from her vision. But as the flower on the spray, so does she hold the summit of my mind. She seems as much to heed my misery as a craft does the sea that uplifts no wave. The weight that sinks me is such as no rhyme may hold in poise. O agonizing and unpitying file that dumbly scrapes away my life! How is it that thou shrinkest not from gnawing thus my heart, coat within coat, as I from telling folk who he is that gives thee power thereto? For my heart more trembles when I think of her in such region that folk may thither direct their eyes, for fear that through should shine my thought externally so as to be discovered, than I do at death, who every sense already crunches with the teeth of love, which as I muse scorches so their powers that their working slackens. He has smitten me to earth and stands over me with that same sword wherewith he slaughtered Dido, love, to whom I cry and call for grace and humbly pray, and he seems set to refuse all grace. He, ever and anon, uplifts his hand and defies this my weak life in his perversity, and, outstretched and overthrown, he pins me to the earth, exhausted past a quiver. Then rise up shrieks within my mind, and the blood all scattered through the veins flees running towards the heart that summons it, and I lie bleached of it. He smites me under the left side so rudely that the pain re-echoes through my heart. Then do I cry, should he uplift one other time, death will have closed me in ere down his blow descends. So might I see him to the centre cleave the cruel one's heart who quarters mine. Then were no longer black to me the death to which I hasten through her beauty. For she smites as hard in sun as shade, this murderous assassin and robber. O me, that she howls not for me as I for her in the hot cauldron. For swiftly would I cry, I succour thee, and eagerly would do it, e'en as one who upon those fair locks that love has crisped and golden to consume me, would set my hand and then would sate myself. Had I seized the fair locks that have become my scourge and lash, laying hold of them ere tierce, with them would I pass vesper and evening bells, and would not be nor pitiful nor courteous, but were rather as the bear taking his sport. And if love scourges me therewith, I would take more than 1,000 vengeance. Still on those eyes whence issue forth the sparks which set on flame the heart I carry slain, close would I gaze and fixedly to avenge me for that he makes me flee, and then would I render her peace with love. Tornata. Ode, take thy way straight to that lady who hath smitten me and slain, and who robs from me that for which I most thirst, and with an arrow drive thou at her heart, for fair honour is acquired in accomplishing revenge. End of section 23. Section 24 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode VII. Text of the projected 8th treatise. Al poco giorno ed al gran cerchio d'ombra. To the short day and the great sweep of shadow have I come, ah me, and to the whitening of the hills when colour vanishes from the grass. And my longing changes not, for that, its green, so is it barbed in the hard stone that speaks and hears as though it were a woman. And in like fashion does this wondrous woman stand chill like snow beneath the shadow, for no more moves her than a stone the sweet season that warms the hills, and brings them back from white to green, in that it covers them with flowers and grass. When on her head she bears a wreath of grass, she banishes from our mind each other woman, for the waving gold is mingled with the green, so beauteous that love comes there to sojourn in the shadow, who hath riveted me between the little hills more fast by far than calcined stone. Her beauty has more virtue than a stone, and her stroke may not be healed by grass, for I have fled o'er plains and hills, that I might escape from such like woman, and against her light might not give me shadow mountain, nor ever wall, nor leaf of green. Erst have I seen her clad in green, in such guise she would have planted in a stone the love I bear even to her very shadow. Wherefore I have wooed her in a beauteous field of grass, enamoured as was ever woman, and girt around with loftiest hills. But of a truth the rivers would return to the hills, or ere this log, sap-full and green, would catch a flame, after the wont of fair woman, from me, who would endure to sleep on stone all of my life, and go pasturing on grass, only to look where her garments cast a shadow. When the hills cast the blackest shadow, under the beauteous green the youthful woman makes it vanish like a stone hidden by grass. End of section 24. Section 25 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode VIII. Text of the projected ninth treatise. Amor, tu vedi ben che questa donna. Love, thou perceivest that this lady heeds not thy power at any season, which of the other fair ones is wont to make itself the mistress. And when she perceived that she was my mistress, by thy ray that on my face shines, of all cruelty she made herself the mistress, so that it seems not she has the heart of woman, but of whatever beast has of love greatest chill. For through the warm season and through the chill she shows me the semblance of a woman, who should be made of beauteous stone, by hand of such should best carve in stone. And I, who am unshaken more than rock in obeying thee, for the beauty of a woman, bear concealed the stroke of the stone with which thou didst smite upon me, as on a stone that had offended thee long season, in such guise as to reach my heart, where I am stone. And never was discovered any stone, or by virtue of the sun, or by his light, which had so much of virtue or of light, as to have power to aid me against that stone, so that it should not lead me with its chill to where I shall be dead with chill. Sire, thou knowest that by freezing chill the water turns to crystal rock there under the north, where is the great chill, and the air ever into the element of chill there so converts itself that water is mistress in that region by reason of the chill. So before the semblance chill freezes my blood ever in every season, and that thought, which most shortens my life, is all converted into moisture chill, which issues then through the midst of the eye, by which there entered the dispiteous light. In her is gathered all beauty's light, and in like fashion all cruelty's chill runs to her heart, whither pierces not thy light. Wherefore in my eyes so beauteous does she shine when I look on her, that I see her in the rock, or wheresoever else I turn my sight. From her eyes there comes to me the sweet light that makes me heedless of each other woman. Ah, would that she were a more piteous lady towards me, who seek, in darkness and in light, only for serving her the place and season, nor for aught else desire to live long season. Wherefore, O Power, who art earlier than time, earlier than motion or than sense-felt light, take pity upon me, who have such evil season. Enter now into her heart, for in truth 'tis season, so that by thee there pass forth from her the chill which suffers me not, like others, to have my season. For if there overtake me thy strong season in this such state, that noble rock will see me lying in a narrow stone, never to raise me till has come the season when I shall see if ever was fair lady in the world like unto this bitter lady. Tornata. Ode, I bear in my mind a lady such that, for all she be to me of stone, she gives me hardihood where meseems every man is chill, so that I dare to make for this chill the new thing that through thy form gives light which never was conceived in any season. End of section 25. Section 26 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode IX. Text of the projected 10th treatise. Io son venute al punto della rota. I have come to the point of the wheel where the horizon, when the sun declines, yields up the twinned heaven, and the star of love is severed from us by the shining ray that enforks her so athwart as to become her veil. And that planet that strengthens the cold displays himself to us full on the great circle, wherefrom each of the seven casts shortest shadow, and yet discharges not one single thought of love, wherewith I am laden, my mind, which is harder than a stone in holding firm the image of stone. Rising from the sand of Ethiopia, an alien wind disturbs the air by reason of the sun's sphere that is now burning it. And it passes the ocean, whence it leads us store of such cloud that if another baffle it not, this hemisphere it all closes up and seals, and then resolves and falls in white flakes of chill snow and of grievous shower, whence the air is saddened all and weeps. And love, who his nets draws back on high, for the beating wind abandons not me. So beauteous is the lady, this cruel one, who has given me for my lady. Fled is every bird that followeth the heat from that region of Europe that loses not the seven chill stars ever. And the rest have set a truce upon their voices, no more to sound them, till the green season, unless it be by cause of wailing. And all animals that are wanton in their nature are discharged from love, because the chill deadens their spirit. And mine beareth the more of love, for my sweet musings are not reft from me, nor are not given me by revolving season, but a lady gives them me of but short season. Past their limit have the leaves that the virtue of the ram drew forth to adorn the world, and dead is all the grass. No branch conceals itself in green, save laurel or pine or fir, and such other as preserves its verdure. And so hard and bitter is the season that it slays upon the slopes the flowers that have not power to endure the frost. And the amorous thorn, love, for all that, draws not from out my heart, for I am fixed ever to bear it the while I am in life, although I lived for ever. The veins pour forth the steaming waters by reason of the vapours earth holdeth in her womb, who draweth them up aloft from the abyss, whereby the path that pleased me in fair weather has now become a river, and will be, whilst the winter's great assault shall last. The earth makes one seeming cemented floor, and the dead water turns to glass, by reason of the cold that locks it from without. And I from my warfare have not, for that, drawn back one step, nor would draw back, for if torment be sweet, death must surpass all other sweetness. Tornata. My ode, what now will come of me in the next sweet season of renewal, when rains love upon the earth from all the heavens? If throughout these frosts love is in me alone, and no other where? That will come to me which comes to a man of marble, if in the maiden, for a heart be marble. End of section 26. Section 27 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode X. Text of the projected 11th treatise. E m'incresce di me si duramente. I have ruth for myself so cruelly that as much suffering is furnished me by the pity as by the pain. Ah me, that dolorously I feel, against my will, the breath of the last sigh gathering within the heart that the beauteous eyes smote, when love opened them with his own hands to lead me to the season that undoes me. O me, how gentle, tender and sweet did they lift themselves upon me when they began the death that is now so grievous to me, saying, Our light brings peace. Peace will we give thy heart, to thee delight. Said to my eyes, Time was, those of the beauteous lady. But when of their intelligence they learned that by her might my mind was now wholly reft from me, with love's ensigns they wheeled about, so that their victorious spectacle was not beheld again one single time. Whence is left mourning my soul, that looked for solace from them? And now all but dead, doth she behold the heart to whom she was espoused, and must needs depart love-smitten. Love-smitten she goes weeping on her way beyond this life, she the disconsolate, for love expels her. She departs thence, so grieving that, ere she goes, her Maker hearkeneth with pity to her. She has gathered herself midmost the heart, together with that life which remains quenched only at the moment when she wends her way, and there utters her complaint of love, who from this world expels her, and many a time embraces the spirits that still weep, that she loses their company. The image of this lady sits yet in my mind where love established her, being her guide. And it irks her not of the woe which she beholds, nay, rather is she far more beauteous now than e'er before, and far more joyously she seems to smile, and lifts her eyes that slay, and cries over her who weeps that she must go, Get gone, thou wretch, now get thee forth. And this cry is caught up by the yearning which assails me after its wont, albeit the smart is less. For greatly hath the power of feeling waned, and draweth nearer to the end of woes. The day whereon she came into the world, as stands recorded in memory's book that wanes, my infant person sustained a passion never known, such that I remained fulfilled with terror. For on my every power a curb was set so suddenly that down I fell to earth by reason of a light that smote me at the heart. And, if the book errs not, the main spirit trembled so mightily that well it seemed as though death was reached in this world by him. Now he who set this moving hath ruth of it. Then when appeared to me the great beauty which so makes me mourn, ye gentle ladies to whom I have addressed me, That power that has most nobility, gazing upon the joy, perceived right well that its woe was born, and recognized the longing that had been created by the intent gaze that she wrought, so that she then said, weeping, to the others, "Here shall arrive to hold vicarious sway the beauteous form of one whom I have seen, who even now strikes me with terror, and shall be lady over all of us so soon as it be the pleasure of her eyes." Tornata. To you, ye youthful ladies, have I spoken, whose eyes are adorned with beauties, and mind vanquished and bemused by love, that commended to you may be my rhymes, where'er they be. And, before you, I pardon my death to that beauteous being who has the blame of it to me wards, and has never pitied. End of Section 27. Section 28 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode XI. Text of the projected 12th treatise. Poscia ch'amor del tutto m'ha lasciato. Since love has utterly forsaken me, not at my will, for never had I been so joyous, but because he had pity so much upon my heart that he might not endure to hearken to its wailing, I will sing, thus disenamoured, against the sin that has arisen in our midst, of counter-calling such one as is base and irksome by a name of worth, to wit of gallantry, which is a thing so fair as to make worthy of the mantle imperial him in whom it reigns. A veritable sign it is which shows where virtue sojourns. Wherefore I am assured that if I well defend it in speech, even as I conceive it, love will again do me grace of himself. There are who by flinging their wealth away think to assert a place of worth there, where the good take stand who after death make their repair within the mind of such as have discernment. But no pleasure may their largesse give the good, because restraining it had been wisdom, and they had escaped the loss that is now added to the error of them, and of the rest who pass false judgment in their deeming. Who will not call it fault to engulf food, and give the mind to wantoning and deck him as for sale impending at the fair of fools? For the wise prizes not a man after his garments, which are but alien ornaments, but prizes intellect and noble hearts. And others are there who, by being quick to smile, of understanding swift, would be supposed by such as be deceived, seeing them laugh at aught which the blind intellect not yet perceives. They speak with words elect, go their unpleasing way content, so they be gaped at by the herd. They are enamoured never of amorous lady, in their discourse they cleave to mere grimace. They will not move the foot to serve a lady after gallant fashion, but as a robber to his theft, so do they pace to pluck their base delight. Not that, in truth, in women is so quenched all gallant bearing, that they seem animals bereft of intellect. Till heaven accord precise with heaven, which gallantry casts from its way, as much as I relate of it, and more, I, who have skill of it, thanks to a gentle one, who showed it forth in all her utterance, shall not be silent of it, for villainy it would appear to me so base, that I had joined me to its enemies. Wherefore from this point forth, with rhyme more subtle, will I treat of truth about it, but to whom I know not. I swear by him whose name is Love, and who is full of saving, that without doing virtue none may true praise acquire. Wherefore, if that which I am handling be good, as each declares, it must be virtue, or with virtue linked. Not virtue pure and simple is this strayed thing, for it is blamed, renounced, where virtue is demanded most, that is, in seemly folk of spiritual life, or garb that holds with study. Therefore, if it be praised in a cavalier, it must be mingled, caused by more things than one. Wherefore this same must needs clothe itself upon one well, another ill. But virtue, pure and simple, becomes every man. A joyance is it that consorts with love himself, and the completed work, directed by this third, is very gallantry. In being it endures, even as the sun, to make whose being are conjoined the heat and light, and his own perfect fair form. To the great planet she is all resemblant, who, from the east, forward till he conceals himself, with his fair rays, down pours life and power below into material, according as is disposed. Even as she, scornful of so many folk as bear human semblance, but not corresponds their fruit unto their leaves, because of ill which they have practised, brings near like blessings to the gentle heart. For she is swift to give life with fair semblances and new beauteous acts, which every hour she seems to find. And he has virtue for his model who lays hold on her. O false cavaliers, evil and guilty, enemies of her who to the Prince of Stars is likened! That man whom she will have both gives and takes, and ne'er it irks him, neither the sun to give light to the stars, nor to take from them help in working his effect, but one and the other draws delight therein. Ne'er is he drawn to wrath by words, but such only does he gather as be good. And what things he hath to tell are, each and every, fair. For his own sake is he held dear and by sage ones desired. For from the savage rest he holds or praise or blame of equal worth. For no greatness doth he mount up in pride, but where it chances that it is fitting to display his valour, then he wins praise. They who are living all work counterwise. End of section 28. Section 29 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode XII. Text to the projected 13th treatise. La dispietata mente, che pur mira. The torturing memory that ever looks back to the time that has departed from the one side assails my heart, and the amorous longing that draws me towards the sweet country I have left hath on the other side the might of love. Nor do I find such strength within as may long make defence, gentle my lady, save it comes from thee. Wherefore, if it behoves thee for its deliverance e'er to do emprise, may it please thee send thy salutation to be the heartening of its power. May it please thee, my lady, not to fail at this point the heart that so loveth thee, since from thee alone it looks for succour. For good liege lord ne'er draweth rein in succouring vassal who cries out for him, for not him only he defends, but his own honour. And verily its pain afflicts me hotlier, when I reflect that thou, my lady, by love's own hand art painted therewithin, and even for that cause shouldst also thou hold it far greatlier in care. For he, from whom all good must needs appear, because of his own image, holdeth us the dearer. If thou shouldst speak, O sweet my hope, of setting a delay on that which I demand, know that I may not longer wait on it. For at the limit of my power I stand, And this thou shouldst discern, whenas I have set me to explore my final hope. For to bear every load upon his back a man is bound up to the mortal weight, ere he make trial of his chiefest friend. For how he shall discover him to stand he knows not. And if it chance that he respond amiss to him, nought is there that can cost so dear, for swiftest and most bitter death he hath thereby. And whom I chiefliest love art thou, and who the greatest gift canst give me, and in whom most my hope reposes. For only to serve thee do I desire life, and such things as make for thy honour I demand and will, all else being grievous to me. Thou hast the power to give me what no other may, for all the yea and nay of me within thy hand hath love placed, whereat myself I magnify. The faith I meet to thee flows from thy tender bearing, for whoso looks on thee in verity knows from without that within there is pity. Then let thy salutation now be launched, and come into the heart that waits for it. Gentle, my lady, e'en as thou hast heard. But know that at its entrance it is found strong barred by that same arrow that love discharged the day I was made captive, whereby the entrance is disputed to all other save to the messengers of love, who know to open it by will of that same power that barred. Wherefore in my conflict its coming were but hurt to me, came it without escort of messengers of that liege lord who hath me in his power. Tornata. My ode, needs must be brief thy journey, for thou knowest that for short space now that may be brought about for which thou goest. End of section 29. Section 30 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode XIII. Text of the projected 14th Treatise. Tre donne intorno al cor mi son venute. 3 ladies have gathered round my heart, and seat themselves without, for within sits Love, who holds signory over my life. So beauteous are they, and of such power that the mighty liege, I mean him who is in my heart, can scarce man himself to speak of them. Each one seems grieving and dismayed, as one cast out and weary, from whom all folk have fallen, and whom nor beauty avails, nor wit. Time was wherein, according to their speech, they were beloved. Now they are held in wrath and in neglect by all. These, so lonely, have come as to the house of a friend, for they know verily that within is he of whom I speak. Much doth the one of them grieve in her words, and on her hand supports her, like a clipped rose. Her naked arm, column of grief, feels the ray falling from her face. The other hand conceals her tear-drenched locks, ungirt, unsandaled, and only in herself seeming a lady. When first Love through her tattered gown saw her, where it were comely not to say, he, in pity and in wrath, of her and of her grief made question. "O food of few," answered a voice mingled with sighs, "our nature sends us here to thee. I who am saddest am sister to thy mother, and am righteousness, poor, as thou seest by my weeds and cincture." When she had revealed her and made known, grief and shame laid hold upon my lord, and he demanded who were the other 2 with her. And she, who was so eager in her tears soon as she understood him, was kindled into hotter grief, saying, "Now, on my eye's behalf, hast thou not ruth?" Then she began, "As thou shouldst know, from its source springs the Nile, a slender stream. There, where the great light is shielded from the earth by the rush spikes, over the virgin wave did I bring forth her at my side, who with her fair tresses dries her tears. This, my beauteous birth, gazing on herself in the clear fountain, brought her forth who was more distant. His sighs held love a little back. Then with eyes softened, that before were wild, he greeted the disconsolate kinswomen. And having grasped one and the other dart, he cried, "Uplift your necks! Behold the arms which I have chosen! Rusted ye see them by disuse. Generosity and temperance, and the others born of our blood, go their way begging, whereat, if this be loss, let the eyes weep and the mouth wail of men whom it concerns, who have come under the rays of such a heaven. Not we, who are of the eternal rock, for though we now be thrust at, we shall endure, and folk will come again who shall make this dart abide in brightness." And I who mark, in divine discourse, comfort and dole bestowed upon such lofty exiles, count as my glory the banishment wreaked on me. And if judgment and force of destiny will have the world convert white flowers into dark, falling amongst the good is yet worthy praise. But because the fair signal of my eyes is reft by distance from my sight, which has set me in flame, light should I count that which is heavy on me. But this flame has already so consumed my bone and flesh that death has put his key unto my breast, for which, if I had fault, many a moon has the sun revolved since it was quenched, if a fault dies because a man repents. Tornata. Ode, on thy weeds let no man set his hand to look on that which a fair woman hides. Let the uncovered parts suffice, the sweet apple to all folk deny for which each one extends his hand. But if it chance that ever thou find one, a friend of virtue, who should pray thee for it, make thyself of fresh hues, and reveal to him the flower that, beauteous without, wakes longing in amorous hearts. End of section 30. Section 31 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Ode XIV. Text of the projected 15th treatise. Dogliami reca nello core ardire. Grief furnishes my heart with daring for a wish that is truth's friend. Wherefore, ladies, if I utter words almost against all mankind, marvel not at it, but recognize your base desire, for beauty, which love concedes to you, only for virtue was formed by his decree of old, against which ye offend. You I address, who are enamoured, for if to us virtue was given, and to you beauty, and to him the power to make one the two, ye should not love at all, but hide away whatever beauty hath been granted you, because there is no virtue which was its targe. Woe's me! What do I go about to say? I say that fair disdain were with reason praised in woman, severing beauty from herself by her dismissal. Man has made virtue distant from himself. Man? No, but the beast that bears man's semblance. O God! What marvel to choose to decline to slave from master, or from life to death! Virtue is still supporting to her doer him she obeys, to him acquires honour, ladies, so much that love stamps him of his chosen household in the blessed court. Joyously she issues from the beauteous gates of her mistress, and returns. Joyously she goes and sojourns, joyously she does her great service. Through the short journey preserves, adorns, increases what she finds. To death she is so counter that she heeds him not. O, dear handmaid and pure, in heaven hast thou taken measurement. Thou alone givest mastery, and this is proved by that thou art a possession always of a veil. Slave, not of a master, but of a base slave he makes himself who departs from such a handmaid. See how great the cost, reckoning one against the other loss, to him who wanders from her. This slavish master is so arrogant that the eyes which make light for the mind are closed for him, so that he needs must walk at prompting of another who hath his eye only on folly. But that my speech may serve you, I will descend from the whole to the detail, and that in sentences more easy, that it be less hardly understood. For rarely underneath the veil does a dark saying reach the understanding. Wherefore is there need of open speech with you? And this I will, for the behoof of you, and verily not me, that ye hold vile all men and in contempt, for it is likeness that breeds delight. Who is a slave like him who followeth a liege in haste, and knoweth not whither he goeth along the dolesome path, as doth the miser hurrying after wealth which plays the tyrant over all? The miser runs, but peace more quickly flees. O blind mind, that may not see thy mad desire! With the sum he looks to catch up with his gold, that infinitely gapes. Lo, when she has come who levels us, tell me, what hast thou wrought, blind undone miser? Answer me if thou canst give other reply than naught. A curse upon thy cradle, which lulled so many dreams in vain! A curse upon thy wasted bread, which is not wasted on the dog! For at eve and morn thou hast amassed and clutched with either hand that which so swiftly draws away from thee. As without measure it is gathered, so without measure is it hugged. This it is that thrusts many into slavery, and should any defend himself, it is not save with mighty conflict. Death, what art thou doing? Dear Fortune, what art doing, that ye dissipate not that which is not spent? But if ye did, to whom to render it? I know not, since such a circle rings us, which compasses us from above. It is the blame of reason, who doth not correct it. If she would say, I am captive, ah, how sorry a defence does the master show whom a slave overcomes! Here shame is doubled, if that to which I point be well considered. False animals, cruel to yourself and others! For ye see, going naked o'er hills and marshes, men before whom vice takes to flight, and ye keep vile mire clad. Before the miser's face displays herself, virtue, who invites her very foes to peace with polished matter to entice them to her, but little it avails, for he ever flees the bait. When she has swung it round with many a cry, she flings the food towards him, so great her care for him. But he spreads not his wings at it. And if at last he come, when she is gone, it seems to irk him so, as though he could not give save so as to make vanish all praise from benefit. I will have all men hear me, one by delaying, and one by vain display, and one by gloomy semblance, turns the gift into a sale so dear as he knows only who pays such purchase. Would you hear whether it wounds? So dismayed is he who receives that henceforth refusal seems not bitter to him. So does a miser mutilate himself and others. Ladies, in a certain branch have I unveiled to you the baseness of the folk that gaze upon you, that ye may hold them in wrath, but far more yet is that which is concealed, because 'tis foul to tell you. In each one is a gathering of all vices, because the world's way is that friendship blends, and the lovesome leaf of the root of good draws other good to it, for like only pleases. See how I advance to my conclusion. For she should not believe who thinks that she is fair indeed, that she is loved by such as these. But if beauty amongst evil things we would enumerate, it might be believed, calling love the appetite of a beast. Oh, may such woman perish as dissociates her beauty from natural goodness on such cause, and believes in love outside of reason's garden. End of section 31. Section 32 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Algy. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. The Mountain Ode. Note: as there is but one well authenticated ode of Dante's, in addition to those in the Vita Nuova and those of the Convivio group, it is here given for the sake of completeness. It is probably later than any of the rest, and stands apart from them. The Mountain Ode. Amor, dacque convien pur ch'io mi doglia. Love, since I needs must make complaint for folk to hear, and show myself bereft of every virtue, grant me the skill to wail even as I would, that the woe which is discharged may be borne forth on my words even as I feel it. Thou wilt have me die, and I am satisfied, but who shall pardon me if I have not skill to tell that which thou makest me to feel? Who shall believe that I am now so smitten? But if thou grant me speech in measure with my torment, see to it, O my liege, that ere I die, she who is guilty may not hear it through me. For should she understand that which I feel within, pity would make less beauteous her beauteous face. I may not flee, so that she come not within my fantasy, no more than I may flee the musing that brings her there. The mad soul, which plies its wit to its own ill, beauteous and injurious as she is, depicts her, and forges its own torture. Then gazes on her, and when right full of the great yearning it draws through the eyes, falls into a rage against itself, for having made the fire wherein all dismally it burns. What argument of reason draws the rein on so great tempest as within me whirls? The anguish that may not be contained within breathes so through the mouth as to articulate and give, to boot, their merit to the eyes. The hostile figure that remains, victorious and cruel, and that lords it o'er the power that wills, enamoured of itself, bids me to go where, in verity, is she herself, since like to like still rushes. Well know I that 'tis snow seeking the sun, but having no more strength I do as he who in another's power goes with his own feet to his place of death. When I draw nigh, meseems that I hear words which cry, "Quick, quick, if thou wouldst see him die!" Then I turn to see to whom I may commend me, to such pass brought by the eyes that slay me with grievous wrong. And what, so wounded I become, O love, thou knowest to relate, not I, thou who dost stay to look on lifeless me. And though the soul thereafter comes again to the heart, nescience and oblivion have been her comrades whilst she was away. When I arise again, and look upon the wound which undid me when I was struck, I may not so assure myself, but that I tremble all for fear, and my discoloured face declares what was the thunderbolt that leapt upon me, for though 'twas the sweet smile that launched it, long time thereafter it abides, darkened, in that the spirit cannot trust itself. Thus hast thou dealt with me, O love, among the Alps, in that river's vale on whose banks thou ever hast been strong upon me. Here, living or dead, at thy will thou handlest me in virtue of that fierce light that makes a thunder-crashing path for death. Woe's me! No ladies here, nor folk of skill can I perceive whom it may irk of my woe. If she heed it not, ne'er do I hope for succour from another, and she, banned from thy court, my liege, marks not thine arrow's stroke. Such mail of pride hath she forged for her breast, that every shaft there breaks its point and course, for her armed heart by naught is bitten. Tornata. O mountain song of mine, thou goest on thy way, mayhap to see my city Florence, who bars me out from her, void of love, and stripped of pity. If thou enter in, go crying, now no longer can my Maker war upon thee here. There whence I come clips him a chain, such that should thy cruelty give way, he has no longer freedom to return. End of section 32.
Section 33 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri, translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Appendix I. The date of the Convivio and its relation to the De Vulgari Eloquentia and the De Monarchia. Dante contrasts the Convivio as a work composed after he had passed the threshold of manhood, gioventute, with the Vita Nuova as written before he had crossed it, and he regarded manhood as lasting from 25 to 45. But since Beatrice died in 1290, Dante's 25th year, the Vita Nuova as a whole cannot have been written in the poet's adolescence, before he entered manhood. The passage, then, can only indicate that the range of emotion represented by the poems of the Vita Nuova belongs to the poet's adolescence, and that with which he desires to connect the canzoni or odes to his early manhood. As to the prose work itself, we have more precise indications. When the first treatise was written, Dante had long been in exile and had wandered over almost every region of Italy. This places us at least some years later than 1302. The first treatise refers forward to the fourth, the second treatise presupposes the first, and refers forward to the third refers back to the second, and forward to the fourth, while both second and third directly carry forward a part of the promise and program of the first. The fourth treatise 3 times refers back to the third. It departs in one respect from the program announced as general in the second treatise. At least 3 of the unwritten treatises were planned, in more or less detail, when the existing books were written. Back references generally specify the chapter, fore references never. Unless definite proof can be brought to the contrary, therefore, we have a right to suppose that the 4 treatises of the Convivio were written in the order in which we have them, and that the whole scheme of the book, as projected in 15 treatises, was already definitely worked out in the author's mind, though subject to modification in detail, when he began to write the first treatise. The indications of date in the 4th treatise are fairly precise. Rudolf, Adolf, and Albert have successively become emperors since Frederick II, but the election of Henry VII in November 1308 has not yet taken place, whereas it is implied that Gherardo da Camino, who died in March 1306, is no longer living. If we may infer from the passage cited above that Albert is already dead, we shall be carried past May 1st, 1308, and shall have a very precise date. But though this seems the natural reading of the passage, it is hardly safe to lay stress on it. But further, a comparison of 4, 6, 180 and following with De Vulgari Eloquentia 1, 12, 36-39 suggests, though it does not prove, that Azzo of Este was already dead, which would take us past the beginning of 1308. Our conclusion, then, is that the 4 treatises of the Convivio were begun a considerable time, probably several years after 1302, and were finished before November 1308, and that the 4th treatise was begun certainly after March 1306, and probably after the beginning of 1308. The idea irresistibly suggests itself that the election of Henry was at least one of the causes that diverted Dante's mind from the completion of the Convivio, and we shall be disposed to regard the whole design and execution of the fragment we possess as belonging essentially to the year 1308 or the immediately preceding years. The close relation of the Convivio in general, and of the first treatise in particular, to the De Vulgari Eloquentia is obvious. Both works deal with the Odes, and in both Dante regards these compositions with evident pride, as conferring on him his chief title to literary fame. In both, his thoughts are engaged on the relations between Latin and the vernaculars, though his views, or at any rate the expression of them, do not completely agree in the 2 works. Compare De Vulgari Eloquentia 1:1, 34-41 with Convivio 1:5, 45 and following. In the absence of clear proof to the contrary, we are justified in assuming that these 2 works, including the second as well as the first book of the De Vulgari Eloquentia, belong to the same period of Dante's life, as they certainly move in the same circle of ideas and interests, and take the same view of the general scope of vernacular poetry. Internal evidence confirms this impression. In the De Vulgari Eloquentia 1:12, 36-39, Frederick II, King of Sicily, not the Emperor Frederick II, Charles II of Naples, the Marquis John, evidently of Monferrato, and the Marquis Azzo, evidently of Ferrara, are spoken of as though still living. They died respectively in 1343, May 1309, January 1305, and January 1308. On the other hand, Dante is already in exile. This gives us a range from the beginning of 1302 to the end of 1304 for the composition of the De Vulgari Eloquentia, and when we reflect on the political agitations that absorbed Dante's thoughts in the early period of his exile, we shall be inclined to place the composition of the work in 1304 rather than earlier. Against this conclusion, which I think we must accept, 2 objections may be urged. Villani and Boccaccio both conjecture that the composition of the De Vulgari Eloquentia was, or may have been, interrupted by the poet's death. But, as they speak quite generally, and seem to have no other data to go on than the fragmentary state of the work, we need not attach any special importance to their suggestion. It is noteworthy that Villani gives the same reason, with greater confidence, for the unfinished state of the Convivio, and this we certainly cannot accept. Moreover, the passage of Villani itself appears not to be above suspicion. A more formidable difficulty is presented by a passage in the Convivio in which Dante speaks of a work which I intend to write, God granting, on the vernacular speech, and in which he promises to deal with a subject actually handled in the De Vulgari Eloquentia as we have it. To this we can only say that, whereas the passage would certainly warrant us in assuming the priority of the first book of the Convivio to the first book of the De Vulgari Eloquentia, in the absence of evidence to the contrary, it does not warrant us in ignoring the clear proof that the first book of the De Vulgari Eloquentia was written before the beginning of 1305, and the very strong presumption that the Convivio was not completed till the middle or towards the end of 1308, for, if Dante took one work in hand before he had completed the other, and this he must in any case have done, and intended to complete the Convivio before he resumed the De Vulgari Eloquentia, he might well refer to the latter, even when speaking of the parts already written, as a future work. But if this seems straining a point, the reader may suppose that the Convivio was begun first of the 2, without supposing that it is prior as a whole, but in that case he will have difficulty in finding time for the long wanderings mentioned in 1:3:20-33. The general conclusion seems safe that the De Vulgari Eloquentia may be dated 1304 and the Convivio 1308, allowing the possibility in the former case that the work may have overflowed into the immediately following years, and in the latter case that it may have been begun in the years immediately preceding. It remains to examine the relation of the Convivio to the De Monarchia. There are two considerations, one of a general and one of a special nature, which give strong support to the belief that the De Monarchia is later than the Convivio. Both works alike deal with the Roman Empire, and in a general way it might be maintained with equal show of justice that chapters 4 and 5 of the fourth treatise of the Convivio are a popular summary of the treatment of the empire in Book 2 of the De Monarchia, or that they are a preliminary sketch of it. But we note that the specific relations of church and state, which form the real subject of the De Monarchia, are ignored in the Convivio. In place of them, we find a short passage on the relations of philosophy to the office of government. Indeed, though, as we shall see, that Dante is full of recognition of the Church as the organ of spiritual truth, he does not seem in any way at all to take count of her as a governing institution. Even in the beautiful passage in which he likens the whole human civility to a religious order, religione, he seems to be thinking rather of the ideal philosophical emperor than of the Pope as the superior. Again, the doctrine of revelation is never in any way worked out in the Convivio. The contemplative life is looked upon throughout rather from the point of view of philosophy than of revelation. It is therefore impossible not to feel that the De Monarchia represents a more developed scheme and one far more closely connected with that of the Commedia than we find in the Convivio. After making all allowances for the differences of treatment natural in a popular and in a scholarly work, we have still to admit that if the Convivio were later than the De Monarchia, it would constitute a bewildering parenthesis between this latter and the Commedia, and would indicate a marked relapse from maturity into comparative crudity. To this general argument we may add a specific one of great weight. In the fourth treatise of the Convivio, Dante criticizes at great length and with unsparing severity that portion of the Emperor Frederick's definition of nobility which makes ancient wealth one of its essential factors. And he defends himself from the charge of irreverence towards the empire in thus disputing the emperor's definition by declaring that it is not part of the imperial office, but rather, as he implies, a part of the office of the philosopher to define nobility. He also attempts to show that a sentiment of Aristotle's which might, quite indirectly, be brought to the support of the opinion he attacks, does not really bear the construction put upon it by his imaginary opponent. Now, the fact is that the incriminated part of Frederick's definition is really due to no other than Aristotle himself, who defines nobility as ancient wealth and virtue, Politics 4, 8, 9. Dante, then, must have seen the utter futility of his attempt to make out that he is only dealing with the emperor in his unofficial capacity, and with an indirect and erroneous deduction from Aristotle, had the passage in Aristotle been in his mind. It is clear, then, that he did not know it, or had forgotten it, when he wrote the fourth treatise of the Convivio. But in the De Monarchia, Dante expressly quotes this passage from Aristotle, and works out his main thesis as to the nobility of the Roman people in connection with it, if not in direct dependence on it. Is it possible that after that he could so completely have forgotten it as to be able to write as he has done in the Convivio? We are driven to the conclusion, therefore, that internal evidence points strongly to the priority of the Convivio to the De Monarchia, with the general difficulties involved in assigning this or indeed any other date to the De Monarchia, we cannot now deal. End of section 33. Section 34 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri, translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Appendix II. On Dante's second love and the relation of the Convivio to the Vita Nuova and the Commedia. The Convivio is the monument of Dante's second love, and we can have no difficulty in forming a clear conception of its object. Dante's second love was for wisdom, that is to say, the wisdom of God, spoken of in the Proverbs, and the wisdom of Solomon. The wisdom that Dante loved was the brightness of the eternal light, the spotless mirror of the majesty of God. Solomon declared of her that God began all creation in company with her, and exclaimed in her person, "When he prepared the heavens, I was there," etc. She is therefore the Logos of the proem of the Gospel of John, and she is expressly identified with the incarnate deity. Ho, worse than dead, who flee from her friendship! Open your eyes and see that before you were she loved you, preparing and ordaining your progress, and after you were made she came to you in your likeness to guide you aright. And again, O ineffable and incomprehensible wisdom of God, which against thy coming into Syria didst make so great preparation beforehand in heaven above and here in Italy. Ultimately, then, Dante's second love is for wisdom as a hypostasis in the Trinity. But the transition is easy to wisdom as an attribute of deity not identified with deity itself. Thus, Dante says of her that her proper abode is in the most secret place of the divine mind, or that she is the spouse of the Emperor of Heaven, and not only spouse but sister and most beloved daughter. And the wisdom that thus exists primarily in the Creator exists in a secondary way in created intelligences, angelic and human. The love of her is philosophy, and therefore Dante may say of his second love that the lady of his adoration was the daughter of God, the queen of all that is, the most noble and most beauteous philosophy. And finally, since the object of any emotion is often called by the name of that emotion itself, the subjects which philosophy, love of wisdom, studies may themselves bear the name of philosophy, and so the sciences, one and all, are a part of the object of Dante's love, inasmuch as they are parts of his lady. And amongst the sciences the noblest and surest place is taken by theology, which suffers no strife of opinions or of sophistical arguments, and is therefore likened to the tranquil empyrean heaven. Such being the lady of Dante's second love, it is clear that she can in no sense be the rival of theology, and since she supersedes Beatrice in Dante's affections, Beatrice cannot be taken as the symbol of theology in the scheme of the Convivio. Nor indeed is there any indication whatever in this work that Beatrice stands, as yet, for anything but the Florentine maiden who lives in heaven with the angels and on earth with my soul. Nor is there any note of hesitation or doubt in Dante's devotion to the Church. She is the spouse and secretary of God. She is Holy Church who cannot utter falsehood. Our minds are incapable of grasping the highest truths unless aided by revelation. The Christian faith cannot lie, and has supreme authority above that of philosophers and poets. It is obvious from these passages, and many others that might be added to them, that the Convivio is not in any way the record, as has been maintained, of a period during which Dante exalted human reason or secular philosophy to the same level of authority as revelation, or treated theology with disrespect. What he records in the Convivio is a period in his life during which his love of study became his dominating passion, partially eclipsing the memory of Beatrice. But the wisdom he loved, so far from leading him away from theology, led him to it, for theology was the most glorious of the sciences, which constituted the body of wisdom as love constituted her soul. Clearly, Dante's dominating motive in writing the Convivio was a passion for the study and the promulgation of philosophic truth. But he tells us very distinctly that he was also moved by the desire to glorify the Italian language, and by the desire to avert from himself the infamy of having yielded to so great a passion as the reader of his odes would suppose to have had possession of him. And the way in which he intends to avert this infamy is by allegorizing all the odes of passion without distinction. This intention may have been only incidental to the real purpose, but it was evidently essential and integral to the method and scheme of the Convivio. We have to ask, then, whether we can accept all the love poems on which Dante comments or promises to comment in the Convivio as having really been addressed in the first instance to philosophy. It is clear that we cannot. The seventh treatise was to be a comment on Ode VI, and it is impossible for a moment to believe that this poem relates to anything but earthly passion. Dante's confession to Forese and his desire to dissociate himself from the moral impression produced by his odes are a sufficient comment on this poem and its companions, even if, for the moment, we leave aside the evidence of Cantos 30 and 31 of the Purgatorio. Some of the Convivio cycle of the odes commemorated phases of passion from which the author, in the lofty sense of his mission, now desired to dissociate himself. Examining the odes in detail, we can have little doubt that 6, 7, 8, and 9 were poems of earthly love inspired by a woman of whom we have no other knowledge, and that 2, 4, and 5 are hymns of love genuinely addressed to philosophy, whereas 10 and 12 seem to connect themselves with Beatrice, and 1 irresistibly carries us to the Lady of the Window of the Vita Nuova, with whom indeed Dante himself directly connects it. Now, we cannot accept Dante's asseveration that the Lady of the Window was no other than philosophy, and that the ode Voi che intendendo il terzo ciel movete, which stands at the head of the second treatise, was from the first allegorical. We might hesitate to disbelieve his express statement, had we not seen that it is merely incidental to his general purpose of allegorizing all his odes. As it is, this particular bit of allegorizing must stand or fall with the whole scheme, that is to say, it must fall with it. But the inconsistencies and frigidities to which Dante is driven in allegorizing this ode are in themselves sufficiently convincing. In the Vita Nuova, the Lady of the Window first appears to Dante a certain space after the first anniversary of Beatrice's death, and then tries his constancy during certain days, after which the memory of Beatrice victoriously reasserts itself, and the poet, writing after the close of the whole episode, pronounces the thought of this lady as gentle in so far as it discoursed of a gentle lady, but in other respects most base. Further, he declared that the heart which took part for the Lady of the Window signifies appetite. In the Convivio, the lady, now identified with my Lady Philosophy, first appears to Dante considerably more than 3 years after Beatrice's death. It is some 30 months after this before he has sufficiently overcome the first difficulties of study to feel the full power of his enamorment. He does not purpose to speak any more of Beatrice in this whole work. He emphatically warns his reader against taking heart to mean any special part of the soul or body. And, so far from being ashamed of his new love as most base, he frankly exalts it over his first love for Beatrice, and declares that a man ought not, because of a greater friend, to forget the services received from the lesser, but if it really behoves him to follow the one and to leave the other, when he follows the better, the other is not to be abandoned without some fitting lamentation. In spite of Dante's declaration, then, that he does not intend the Convivio in any way to derogate from the Vita Nuova, we must believe that it was only by a tour de force that he could attempt to harmonize the scheme of the one work with that of the other, and that we shall be safer in basing our judgment as to the lady of the window and the ode that concerned her upon the internal evidence of the Vita Nuova and the ode itself, than upon the express assertions avowedly made with the purpose of the Convivio. We have therefore reached the conclusion that Dante desired to dissociate himself from the implications of some of his poems, which implications he regards as infamous, that he intended to effect his purpose by treating all his love poems as allegorical, and that in pursuance of this purpose he actually explained Ode I in a manner inconsistent with the narrative of the Vita Nuova and with the facts. But the scheme, alien surely from Dante's sincerity of character, was never completely carried out. Henry's election and expedition, as we have seen reason to believe, interrupted the progress of the Convivio, and gave rise first to the De Monarchia and then to the political letters. After Henry's fall, the world had changed for Dante. His thoughts had been matured, his whole nature had passed through the fire, his life thought had deepened from that of the Convivio to that of the comedy. And if the substance of the Convivio had become inadequate, its form and scheme had become impossible. Dante had come to see that if there is any aspect of our past lives that is at war with our present lives and aspirations, we must dissociate ourselves from it, not by allegorizing it away, but by purgatorially living ourselves out of it, and into its opposite by confession and by penitence. At the same time he perceived that philosophy, so far from leading him away from Beatrice, had been leading him back to her. It was in sin that he had wandered from her, it was in love of wisdom that he came back to her. My lady Philosophy, no longer the rival of Beatrice, was resolved into Beatrice's emissary, Virgil, and Beatrice herself. The superseded scheme of symbolism of the Convivio was abandoned. The poet purged himself from its taint of insincerity, and after his passage through purgatory, the supreme confession and the agony of penitence with which he met his outraged ideal in the earthly paradise give us his final comment on the aberrations he had once thought to explain away, final save for the light that streams upon the whole question of sin, repentance, and forgiveness from the Paradiso. End of section 34. Section 35 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri, translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Appendix III. The Astronomy of the Convivio. Dante follows the Ptolemaic system of astronomy, a good account of which will be found in Young's General Astronomy. But he only deals with the simplest elements of the system, and avoids all such points as the eccentricities of the planetary orbits, corresponding to the ellipticities of orbits of modern astronomy. The difficulty which students find in understanding the astronomical passages in Dante is due to ignorance of astronomy in general, not to ignorance of the Ptolemaic system, which is extremely simple and easy to connect directly with the observed phenomena of the heavens. Dante's expositions are of admirable lucidity, and any one who has watched the actual doings of the stars, the sun and moon, and the planets, will understand them without difficulty. Those who are only acquainted with representations of the solar system in books or orreries may find some difficulty in adjusting their minds to a system that always keeps in direct touch with the appearance of the heavens, as really seen from the earth, but the following hints may be found useful. The starry heaven presents the appearance of a solid sphere revolving round fixed poles, one of which is visible to us from east to west. This appearance was taken by the ancients as a fact. Between midnight and midnight, that is, during one diurnal revolution of the sun round the earth, any given star that has been observed will be found to have completed something more than a full revolution, and consequently to be further west than it was 24 hours ago. That is to say, the stars revolve faster than the sun, and constantly overtake him in their journey from east to west. In the course of a year, the whole starry heaven has thus overtaken and passed the sun, so that the stars are once more in the same relative positions with respect to him. Moreover, the sun rises due east at the spring equinox, and then till the summer solstice rises further and further north, till he is about 23½ degrees north of the equator, then a little further south every day, till at the autumn equinox he is on the equator and rises due east again, and by the winter solstice is 23½ degrees south of the equator, after which he creeps north again. It will be seen, then, that, in the course of a year, the sun both lags behind the stars till they have all passed him, and also moves north and south within a space of 23½ degrees on each side of the equator. That is to say, he works back through the stars, tracing on the starry heavens a great circle at an angle of 23½ degrees with the equator, and cutting the equator at 2 points. To account for this, the ancients supposed that inside the sphere of the stars was another sphere, the axes of which were fixed, not mechanically, as suggested by the figure, in 2 points of the starry sphere 23½ degrees distant from the poles, and that the sun was fixed on the equator of the inner sphere. Now, let the reader suppose himself to be standing somewhere on the surface of the earth, in the northern hemisphere, at the center of the 2 spheres in the figure. If the outer sphere revolved, carrying the inner sphere, otherwise motionless, with it, he would see the sun moving round once in every 24 sidereal hours clockwise. If, on the other hand, the outer sphere were to cease revolving, and the inner sphere were to revolve counterclockwise once in a year, he would see the sun trace a circle on the starry sphere, moving back from west to east at its most northern point, 23½ degrees above the starry equator, and at its most southern point, 23½ degrees below it. If both of these motions are going on at once, both effects will follow. That is to say, the sun will be carried round every day from east to west with the stars, but also will, at the same time, lag behind them, and also creep north or south according to the season of the year. He will, in fact, trace the spiral which has been described above as the course he actually appears to take. The resolution of this spiral into a combination of 2 circles was the triumph of ancient astronomy, and it still holds its place in modern astronomy, the 2 circles being now regarded as the motion of the earth round her own axis and her motion round the sun. The motion of the moon is like that of the sun, only that her proper orbit from west to east is completed in a month instead of a year. A closer inner sphere, therefore, was supposed, which sympathetically obeyed the motion of the starry sphere and had its oblique axis fixed, not mechanically, in it, but was unaffected by the motion of the sun's proper sphere. On its equator the moon was fixed. The motion of the planets, other than the sun and moon, which are also regarded as planets by the ancients, is more complicated. On the whole, they travel through the stars obliquely to the equator from west to east, like the sun and moon, each having its own period of proper revolution. But they do not travel steadily, and sometimes they actually travel westward through the stars for a time. To explain this, the ancients introduced, in the case of these planets, a third circular motion. The planet, Venus, for instance, was not supposed to be fixed, like the sun, on the equator of its proper sphere, but another smaller sphere, the center of which would lie on the equator of that sphere, was supposed to be thrust into its side, and to revolve round the center, which the greater sphere was itself carrying round the earth from west to east. Here the reader's modern conception of the solar system may help his imagination. Let him suppose himself to be observing our moon from the sun in the center of the system. Further, let him suppose the distance of the moon from the earth to be immensely increased, and the motion of the earth so slowed down that the movement of the moon round the earth is more rapid than that of the earth round the sun, and lastly, let him suppose the earth to shrink till it becomes a mere ideal point, circling round the sun, while the moon circles round it. He will see that under these conditions the moon would appear to take a looped course through the stars, prevailing from west to east, but occasionally doubling back from east to west. This is exactly analogous to the course of a planet as seen from the earth, and explained in terms of the Ptolemaic mechanism. The three circles of the starry sphere, the planet's proper sphere, and the planet's epicycle or inserted sphere correspond to the three circles of the earth's revolution on her axis, her revolution round the sun, and the planet's revolution round the sun, as conceived by modern astronomy. Again, the great triumph of resolving the extremely complex apparent motion of the planets into a combination of three circles was won by the ancients and is still enjoyed by the modern astronomers. Finally, Hipparchus observed the phenomenon now known as the precession of the equinoxes, and explained by modern astronomy as due to a slow top-like motion of the earth's axis. Its effect on the appearance of the heavens is to make a slow change in the pole of the daily rotation of the starry heavens. Our pole star was not always and will not always be so near the pole as it now is. This was explained by the ancients by supposing that the starry sphere itself had its poles obliquely fixed, not mechanically, in a sphere outside itself, on which there is no heavenly body, just as the poles of the proper spheres of the planets were fixed in the starry sphere. It was this outmost sphere to which the daily rotation of the whole heavens from east to west was due. The starry sphere had a slow proper motion from west to east, 1 degree in 100 years, Dante thought, which was communicated, like that of the primum mobile, or outmost sphere, to all the inner spheres. The proper motions of the other spheres were strictly proper, that is, they not only originated in them, but were not communicated by them to any of the lower spheres within them. The proper motions of the other spheres were strictly proper, that is, they not only originated in them, but were not communicated by them to any of the lower spheres within them. End of section 35. Section 36 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri, translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED. Editorial Note. In preparing this translation for the Temple Classics, I have generally followed the text of Dr. Moore's Oxford Dante, but I have sometimes preferred that of Perezzini's Variorum edition, Modena, 1831, or have adopted a manuscript reading which it indicates. On these matters, and on significant changes of punctuation, I have given such information in the notes as I thought might be useful in a popular work, but not in a uniform or systematic manner. But in the few cases in which I have ventured upon actual emendation of the manuscript text on my own authority, I have of course invariably given notice of them in the notes. Square brackets in the text indicate insertions. Both translations and notes are for the most part based on independent study, but I have found Perezzini's edition, cited above, of the highest value in difficult passages. Kahnegise's German translation, Leipzig, 1856, I have found useful as a check, but, though it is in general a singularly careful and scholarly piece of work, it follows Perezzini in cases of difficulty so closely as to deprive it of independent value in passages of doubtful interpretation. When my translation was completed, I compared it throughout with Miss Hillard's The Banquet, Kegan-Paul, 1889. I have felt compelled in very many passages to adhere to a translation at variance with hers, as will be obvious to any one who compares the two versions. But the number of passages in which her translation enabled me to detect and avoid mistakes in my own can of course be known only to myself, and I wish to be allowed, if I may do it without impertinence, to express my thanks to her, together with my high admiration of the sustained brilliance of her work from the literary point of view. To Mr. Toynbee's Dante Dictionary and Studies my obligations are extensive. Many of them are acknowledged in detail. My debt to Dr. Moore's first series of studies will be understood by those, but by those only, who have attempted some work similar to that involved in annotating the Convivio. I have not always agreed with him in my identification of Dante's references to Aristotle, and I have often drawn independent conclusions from the material he has gathered, but my work, such as it is, would have been almost impossible within the limits of time at my disposal had I not been able to take his patient researches as a starting point. To Mr. Edmund Gardner I owe a very special personal debt indicated in connection with the translation of the Odes. Philip H. WICKSTEED. End of section 36. End of the Convivio by Dante Alighieri, translated by Philip H. WICKSTEED.